Have you ever been told that we can't have morality without believing in God? That without religion, there's no way to really say how we should or shouldn't behave? Well, I'm an atheist with a YouTube channel dedicated to ethics, and so I kinda disagree. Not only do I think we can have morality without believing in God, but I think that religious and secular morality often have a lot more in common than most people might think. So what exactly is morality? What do people even mean when they use that word? The most agreed upon definition seems to be that morality is all about which behaviours are right and wrong, good and bad, or, in other words, how we ought to behave. But personally, I think that this definition, without any extra information, is basically meaningless. To explain why I think this, I'd like you to imagine that you stop someone in the street and you ask them which way is the right direction, but you don't tell them where you're going. Not only would they have no idea which way the right direction is, but the entire concept of the right direction is rendered meaningless by the absence of a destination. The question only makes sense when you know where you want to end up. And I believe the same is true for morality. The question of how ought we behave only makes sense when we know what the goal is. Or in other words, what is the destination we're ultimately trying to arrive at through moral decision making. And so this is where I get to the main point of the video. Many religious people claim that without a belief in God, morality is without destination, and that it doesn't make sense for an atheist like myself to claim that anything is morally right or wrong. But is this true? To find out, I'm going to be comparing my understanding of morality with one of the most common forms of religious morality, and maybe we might discover something interesting. For me and other atheists like Sam Harris and Peter Singer, the destination or goal of morality is well-being, which is basically just a general way of saying that morality is all about trying to reduce the amount of harm and suffering there is in the world, while trying to increase the amount of happiness there is in the world. And once you assume this definition of morality, you'll realise that there are objectively right and wrong ways to behave that aren't simply a matter of opinion. For example, donating food to a homeless shelter clearly improves their well-being and is therefore a morally good thing to do. Whereas, torturing the people at the homeless shelter for fun is quite obviously not conducive to their well-being and is therefore a morally bad thing to do. And the claim that torturing these people would be bad for their well-being is not just a subjective opinion, it's a fact about the consequences of our actions. Now at this point you might be asking yourself, why is well-being the goal? Isn't that just an arbitrary thing to value? But it's actually not. Not only do all sentient beings necessarily value their own well-being, which means it's a goal we all share whether we like it or not, but everything else we value about our lives only matters to us because we value our well-being more fundamentally. Take freedom, for example. We don't value freedom purely for its own sake. We value it because having a sufficient amount of freedom prevents us from suffering and allows us to live happier lives. Whereas if freedom didn't have any impact on our well-being whatsoever, we simply wouldn't value it. And so the avoidance of suffering and the pursuit of happiness aren't just arbitrary goals. They are quite literally the things we all care about most. So, that's my secular perspective of morality, but what about the religious approach? What would it mean if we really do need God for morality? For many theists, morality is presented as something else entirely. Instead of focusing on something like well-being, morality is about following the rules or commands of a god. Because any given god is believed to be the creator of the universe, they are often also believed to be the ultimate authority on how we should behave. This type of morality is known by philosophers as divine command theory, and is basically just the belief that whatever God commands is morally right, and whatever God prohibits is morally wrong. Simple, right? Well, if we accept this framework at face value, then anything God commands of you is necessarily the moral thing to do. Which means that if God were to hypothetically command something horrific and violent, like, for example, asking parents to kill their own children, then under this view, killing their children would be the morally right thing to do, and refusing to do it would be morally wrong. However, before you start having a go at me in the comments, there are plenty of religious people that push back against hypotheticals like this because they don't interpret divine command theory in this way. They claim that the God that they believe in would never command something so cruel, because God is compassionate and all-loving and would only ever command what is good for us. But this objection actually exposes a classic philosophical problem put forward by the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. The problem is known as the Euthyphro dilemma, and it asks the following question: is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? If the former is true, then morality starts to seem pretty arbitrary, because there is no external standard of goodness that God's commands need to live up to. If he commands you to kill your own children, then that's what's morally right just because he said so. And if he tells you he's changed his mind, then killing your children becomes the morally wrong thing to do just because he said so. But if the latter is true, and God commands things because they are good, then what makes those things good cannot simply be the fact that God commanded it. There would have to be some kind of external goal that God is trying to achieve, and that goal is what sets the standard for morality. But here's where it gets interesting. If you believe that God is a compassionate and all-loving deity, then that must mean that he cares deeply about the well-being of the sentient beings he's created and wouldn't want us to suffer unnecessarily, right? Which would mean that a truly loving God would want to foster our well-being as much as possible and would only give commandments in order to achieve that goal. So if you believe it's good to follow the commands of an all-loving God because it promotes well-being, then your morality and mine are built on exactly the same foundation, and we're ultimately trying to achieve the same goal. It's just that you believe there's a God guiding us towards this goal, and I don't. I hope this video has shown that it's not only possible to have morality without believing in God, but that many theists and atheists actually share the same moral goals without even realizing it. So whether you're religious or not, if you care about the well-being of others and reducing the amount of harm and suffering there is in the world, then there are objectively right and wrong ways to do that. And there's no reason why we can't work together to make this world a kinder and more compassionate place for all the sentient beings that live on it. Thanks so much for watching. If you disagree with anything I've said in this video, then please let me know in the comments and we can discuss. A like and subscribe would be hugely appreciated. And as always, be kind to yourselves and be kind to animals. I'll see you in the next one.